I still remember the exact moment my stepdaughter looked right through me, like I was invisible. The wedding hall was full of people. Music played softly. Glasses clinked. Laughter floated through the air. But in that moment, the entire room felt silent. Emily stood at the center of the ballroom, holding a microphone. Her white dress shimmered under the warm lights. Everyone watched her with smiles. She began thanking the people who had supported her life. My mom, she said. My grandparents. My aunts and uncles. The applause was warm. Then she paused. For a second, I thought she might look at me. But she didn't. She continued her speech, and my name never came. Not once. And when her eyes finally swept across the room and briefly landed on me, she looked away, like I was just another guest, like the last 10 years had never happened. I sat alone at a small round table near the back of the ballroom. Table 18, right next to the service doors where waiters carried trays of food in and out. The main family table was near the dance floor. That's where Emily sat with her mother, her grandparents, and Mark's wealthy family. That's where the cameras were. That's where the laughter was. But I wasn't there. I folded my hands together and tried to keep my breathing steady. Because humiliation is a strange thing. It doesn't explode. It settles quietly inside your chest. Like a weight. The ballroom itself was beautiful. Tall windows overlooked the city skyline. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen stars. White roses decorated every table. The kind of wedding people post about online for months afterward. Everything was perfect. Except for one thing. Me. My name is Daniel Carter. And for 10 years, I helped raise Emily. I met her mother, Laura, when Emily was 12 years old. Back then, Emily was quiet. Careful. Her father had passed away the year before. The loss had left a hole in her world. And I never tried to replace the man she lost. I knew that wasn't my place. Instead, I simply showed up. Again and again. At first, Emily barely spoke to me. When I picked her up from school, she would sit quietly in the passenger seat and stare out the window. But one afternoon, she asked a small question. Do you know algebra? I laughed softly. Enough to survive it. That night, we sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours, solving equations. That was the first time she smiled at me. Over the years, those small moments built something real. I drove her to soccer practice. I sat through school plays. I helped her build a science project that ended up winning second place at the district fair. When she had her first heartbreak at 16, she sat on the porch steps and cried while I awkwardly tried to offer advice. And when she graduated high school, she hugged me tightly and whispered something I never forgot. Thank you for never trying to replace my dad. Those words meant everything to me. But things slowly changed after she met Mark. Mark came from a wealthy family. Very wealthy. His parents owned several businesses in the city. Large houses, luxury cars, private schools. Their world was very different from mine. The first time I met Mark's parents was at a dinner Emily arranged. The restaurant was expensive. The kind where the waiter explains the menu like it's a lecture. Mark's mother looked elegant and composed. Mark's father spoke slowly, like every sentence had been rehearsed. Eventually, the conversation turned to me. So Daniel, his mother said politely, what do you do? I run a construction company, I said. She nodded. A small smile appeared on her face. But something behind her eyes shifted, just slightly, like she had placed me into a category and decided I belonged there. After that dinner, Emily began changing. Phone calls became shorter. Family dinners became rare. Wedding planning meetings happened without me. Laura told me not to worry. Weddings are stressful, she said. Emily's just overwhelmed. I believed her, because the alternative felt too painful. Then the invitations arrived. Heavy cream envelopes with gold lettering. I opened mine at the kitchen table. The paper was thick and elegant. Inside was the program for the ceremony. I scanned the names. Mother of the bride. Grandparents of the bride. Even distant relatives had titles printed under their names. But when I found my name, it simply said, Daniel Carter. No title. No connection. No role. Just a guest. I stared at it for a long time. Then I quietly folded the paper and placed it back in the envelope. Love sometimes asks you to swallow disappointment. So I did. The wedding day arrived with clear blue skies. The ceremony was held in a beautiful garden behind the hotel. White chairs lined a long aisle covered in rose petals. When Emily walked down the aisle, she looked radiant. For a moment, I forgot everything else. All I saw was the little girl who once scraped her knees riding a bike in our driveway. The teenager who once asked me to help move her into her college dorm. The young woman who used to sit beside me during movie nights. But that version of Emily seemed distant now, like a memory fading in the sunlight. The reception followed in the grand ballroom. Guests filled the room. Music played softly, and the seating chart stood near the entrance. I scanned the list until I found my name. Table 18. Near the back wall. Not with family. Not even close. At first I assumed it was a mistake. I politely approached a young coordinator. "Excuse me," I said. "I believe there may be an error." She checked the list, then looked up with a practiced smile. "I'm sorry, sir. That's your assigned seat." Assigned. The word echoed strangely in my ears. I walked to the table slowly. The other guests, there were kind strangers. An older couple. Two distant cousins. A college friend of Emily's I had never met. They welcomed me warmly. But one woman eventually asked a quiet question. "Aren't you her stepfather?" "Yes," I said. She glanced toward the main table, then back at me. "That's unusual." I smiled gently. Weddings can be complicated. Dinner passed slowly. The main tables filled with laughter. At table 18, conversation stayed polite, but quiet. Every so often someone would glance toward me with sympathy. I pretended not to notice. Then the speeches began. Mark's father spoke first. He told stories about Mark's childhood. The crowd laughed. Emily's grandfather followed. He shared memories from when she was little. More laughter. More applause. But through all those speeches, something was missing. My name. Finally, Emily stood up. She held the microphone confidently. "I'm so grateful for the people who helped shape my life," she said. My chest tightened. This was the moment. Maybe she saved me for last. "My mom," she said warmly. "My grandparents. My amazing family." I waited, but the speech ended. Applause filled the room, and my name was never spoken. That was when I realized something painful. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. I quietly pushed my chair back and stepped outside into the hallway. The music faded behind the closed doors. Cool air filled the empty corridor. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes for a moment. 10 years. Reduced to silence. That didn't feel right. The voice came from behind me. I turned. Mark stood there. The groom. His tie slightly loosened. His expression serious. "I'm sorry," I said. He hesitated. "I noticed where you were seated." "And the speech?" I shrugged gently. "It's Emily's day." But Mark didn't look convinced. "You helped raise her, didn't you?" I nodded once. "For a while." Mark rubbed the back of his neck. "My parents handled most of the wedding planning," he admitted quietly. "They insisted on certain arrangements." I understood immediately. Families like theirs preferred clean stories. Perfect photos. No complicated chapters. Mark looked back toward the ballroom doors. Then at me again. "Something about tonight feels wrong." I didn't answer. Sometimes silence tells the truth better than words. After a moment, he straightened his jacket. "I should get back." He paused, then said something unexpected. "Don't leave yet." And he walked back inside. I didn't know what he meant, but something in his voice made me stay. A few minutes later, I returned to my seat. Dessert had been served. Chocolate cake. Coffee. Conversations buzzed around the room. Then the DJ raised his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced. "The groom would like to say a few words." Mark stepped into the spotlight. The room quieted. He held the microphone calmly. At first he looked at Emily, then the guests. And finally, he looked straight at me. At table 18. "There's something important I need to say," he began. The room grew still. "Today has been beautiful. But I realized something tonight." He paused. "Marriage should begin with honesty." He gestured toward the back of the room, to the man sitting at table 18. Every head turned. All eyes landed on me. "That man helped raise my wife," Mark continued. "And tonight he was treated like a distant guest." The silence deepened. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Mark's parents looked stunned. But Mark continued. "I've spent the last year hearing stories about Emily's life," he said. "Stories about who supported her, who helped her grow. And one name kept coming up." He pointed toward me. "Daniel. My wife once told me that when she failed her first college exam, Daniel stayed up with her all night, helping her study. She told me he drove 4 hours to bring her soup when she was sick. She told me he never tried to replace her father. He simply showed up. Again and again. Mark looked around the room. And tonight, that man is sitting alone in the back. He shook his head slightly. That doesn't feel right. Then he said the words no one expected. So before this celebration continues, I'd like to fix that. He stepped off the stage and began walking toward my table. The entire ballroom watched. Conversation stopped. Music faded. Even the waiters froze. Mark reached my table. He extended his hand. Daniel, he said calmly, would you join the family table? For a moment I didn't move. Not because I was angry, but because dignity sometimes requires patience. Then I stood and shook his hand. As we walked across the ballroom together, whispers followed us. Some guests smiled. Others looked shocked. But Mark never hesitated. When we reached the main table, he pulled out an empty chair. Right beside Emily. Emily finally looked up. Her eyes were filled with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered, so softly only I could hear. I simply nodded and sat down. Not with pride. Not with victory. Just quiet calm. Later that evening, Emily found me near the dance floor. I didn't know how to balance everything, she said. My past, my future, my dad's memory. She looked at me carefully. I thought ignoring it would be easier. I smiled gently. Life isn't about erasing chapters, I told her. It's about honoring them. She hugged me tightly. And for the first time that night, something broken felt repaired. When I left the venue later, the sky was clear. Cool night air filled my lungs. And I realized something important. Respect doesn't always arrive immediately. Sometimes it takes courage. Sometimes it takes patience. And sometimes it takes someone brave enough to speak the truth. If this story resonated with you, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.